You know, the end of the Old Testament is honestly one of the most haunting cliffhangers in all of human history.
Oh, absolutely. It really is.
Because if you read the final words of the prophet Malachi, the text it doesn't end with a triumphant crescendo.
Right. There is no comforting promise of immediate rescue right there at the end.
No, not at all. It actually ends with a severe warning. It ends with the threat of a curse. And then the page turns and there is just nothing.
Nothing but a massive, deafening historical void.
Yeah, 400 years of absolute prophetic silence.
It is a profound and, frankly, terrifying divine pause.
Yeah.
For 4 entire centuries, the heavens are just locked tight.
Which is hard to even wrap our minds around.
It is. I mean, there are no prophets walking the streets of Jerusalem. There are no fresh miracles.
No burning bushes.
Yeah, exactly. No seas parting. No angelic visitations announcing the next move of God. The Jewish people are essentially left holding these ancient scrolls.
Just living on the echoing memory of what God used to do.
Right. Waiting in a darkness that must have felt entirely suffocating for generation after generation.
Which is exactly why I am so incredibly thrilled that you are joining us today as a fellow student of the Word. Welcome to our deep dive into the Scriptures.
It is so good to be here doing this study.
Today, we are focusing our study on the exact moment that 400-year silence is finally shattered.
Yeah.
We are going to be looking closely at Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 12.
Such a pivotal passage.
It really is, because in Matthew chapter 1, we saw the quiet, intensely private, supernatural origin of Jesus in the womb of a virgin.
Very hidden, very intimate.
But right here, as we step into chapter 2, the narrative radically shifts. The king steps out of the shadows and right onto the grand, turbulent theater of world history.
He really does. But the way this global manifestation happens is entirely backward to what anyone would have expected.
Oh, completely backward.
But the irony is just staggering. I mean, the light of the world has finally arrived. The prophesied king, the culmination of millennia of covenants and promises, is physically breathing the air of Judea.
The wait is over.
The wait is over. Yet, his arrival is completely missed by the very people who should have been the first to know.
Yeah, that is the paradox.
He is not publicly recognized by the covenant people. He is not welcomed by the religious elite in Jerusalem, who have literally been guarding the prophetic scrolls for centuries.
Instead, the first public recognition comes from Gentile outsiders.
Right. Pagan scholars from thousands of miles away.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I really want us to sit with that tension today.
It's a heavy tension.
It is, because Matthew is crafting an absolute masterpiece of historical and theological contrast here. As we trace the through line of these 12 verses, we are going to witness a collision of 3 very distinct responses to the arrival of the king.
3 responses that still apply to us today.
Exactly. First, we are going to see the sincere, radically sacrificial worship of seeking Gentiles. Second, we are going to see the fearful, murderous rebellion of the political establishment.
Herod's response.
Right. And third, and this is perhaps the most terrifying one for those of us who study the Bible, we are going to witness the profound, paralyzing apathy of the religious insiders.
That apathy is chilling, but to truly grasp the weight of this collision, we have to meticulously ground ourselves in the historical and geographical reality of the text.
We really do. The Bible is not just a collection of, floating spiritual metaphors.
No, it is anchored in space and time. So let's look at the opening phrase of Matthew chapter 2, verse 1.
Okay, I have it right here.
It says, "Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judaea in the days of Herod the king."
We have to stop right there and unpack those geographical and historical coordinates.
We do, because Matthew is not wasting a single syllable.
Right. He specifically designates Bethlehem of Judaea. So why the geographic qualifier? I mean, why not just say Bethlehem?
Well, because there were actually 2 Bethlehems in the ancient world.
Wait, really? 2 of them?
Yes, there was a Bethlehem far up to the north, situated in the tribal territory of Zebulun.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was a relatively obscure village. But Matthew explicitly points us to Bethlehem of Judaea, which is located just about 5 miles south of Jerusalem.
Okay, so he's being very precise.
Exactly, and the name itself is absolutely dripping with theological significance. In Hebrew, Bethlehem translates literally to house of bread.
Wow. Which is just a brilliant sovereign orchestration.
Isn't it?
The one who will eventually stand before the multitudes and declare himself to be the bread of life. He is physically born in the house of bread.
It's beautiful. But beyond the poetry of the name, there was a massive, legal and royal credential being established right here, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. The geographical location is a direct theological argument for Jesus' right to rule.
Yes.
If you trace the biblical history all the way back to 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 1, Bethlehem is the ancestral stronghold of King David.
The city of David.
Right.
Yeah.
It is the very soil where the prophet Samuel poured oil over the head of a young shepherd boy and anointed him king over Israel.
So by anchoring the birth of Jesus in this specific, seemingly insignificant village, the text is forcefully declaring something.
That the ultimate son of David has arrived.
Exactly. The rightful heir to the eternal throne that God promised in 2 Samuel chapter 7 has finally taken on flesh.
But, and this is a massive but, he arrives at a moment when that throne is currently occupied by a monster.
Yes, a literal monster.
Matthew tells us this happens in the days of Herod the king.
Right.
And if we're going to understand the sheer panic that unfolds in this chapter, we have to understand the man sitting in the palace.
We really do. Because calling Herod a king in the traditional rightful sense is a massive historical distortion.
He wasn't a real king.
No. Herod the Great is one of the most fascinating and terrifying figures in antiquity. He possessed absolutely no legitimate claim to the throne of David.
None at all.
He was not of the tribe of Judah. Historically and biologically, Herod was an Idumean.
Let's expand on that, because for an advanced student of the text, hearing the term Idumean triggers a whole host of biblical alarms.
Oh, definitely.
That means he is an Edomite.
Precisely. He is a direct descendant of Esau.
Wow.
So you have an ancient, simmering, generational hostility playing out right here in the first century.
Going all the way back to Genesis.
Exactly. The tension between Jacob, who was renamed Israel, and Esau, the father of the Edomites. The Edomites were the perpetual historical antagonists of the Jewish people.
And yet, somehow, a son of Esau is reigning over the sons of Jacob.
Through a series of very complex political machinations,
You have
yes.
like a hostile foreign power installing a dictator over a conquered people.
That is exactly what it was.
I always try to visualize the political dynamic of first century Judea for you guys listening. And the best way I can conceptualize Herod is not as this majestic, noble sovereign.
Right.
He's more like a ruthless mafia boss who is installed by a foreign cartel.
That's a great analogy.
And the cartel, in this case, is the Roman Empire.
Yes. Rome needed someone utterly brutal to keep a notoriously rebellious local population in check.
So the Roman Senate basically just hands Herod the title King of the Jews around 40 BC.
That is a highly accurate framework. Rome didn't care about the Davidic covenant. They didn't care about biblical prophecy.
They cared about taxes.
They cared about tax revenue and pacifying the region, period. Now, Herod was a masterful, calculating politician and honestly an incredible architect.
Right. He expanded the Second Temple.
He turned it into an ancient wonder of the world. But his entire reign was built on the terrifyingly fragile foundation of Roman military backing.
He knew he had no divine right to rule.
He knew it perfectly well. He knew the Jewish people despised him as a half-breed usurper. And because his position was so illegitimate, it bred a profound clinical paranoia.
He was a man who slept with one eye open, permanently terrified of being replaced.
Yes.
And his track record of dealing with perceived threats is just unimaginably bloody.
It was a reign of terror. Let me just list a few things. Herod assassinated the entire Hasmonean ruling family that preceded him.
The whole family.
He ordered the murder of his own beloved wife, Mariamne, simply because he suspected her of harboring disloyal thoughts.
His own wife.
He murdered his mother-in-law. He strangled and executed at least 3 of his own sons because he caught wind of rumors that they might be eyeing his throne.
It's just sickening.
His bloodlust was so legendary, so unrestrained, that the Roman Emperor Augustus is historically recorded as saying it was safer to be Herod's pig than his son.
Man, that really paints a picture. That is the suffocating atmosphere of Jerusalem at this time.
Yes.
It's a city holding its breath. Everyone is walking on eggshells around a brilliant but maniacal tyrant who will literally burn the city to the ground to protect his crown.
Absolutely.
And right into the middle of this political powder keg walk the ultimate disruptors. The text introduces them in verse 1 as wise men from the east.
The Magi.
Now, before we look at what they actually do, we have to do some severe cultural myth-busting here.
We definitely do.
Because our modern Western conception of this event has been entirely hijacked by greeting cards and nativity scenes.
Completely hijacked.
We picture 3 quiet, lonely guys in bathrobes, riding camels through the desert, maybe singing a hymn.
We do.
But the text absolutely refuses to support that image.
It certainly does refuse it. First of all, the biblical text never numbers them.
Right, it doesn't say there were 3.
The pervasive idea that there were 3 comes exclusively from the fact that they brought 3 specific types of gifts, which we will analyze shortly. But there could have been 2 of them, or there could have been 50.
Wow, 50.
And furthermore, the text never designates them as kings. The Greek term used by Matthew is magoi.
Magoi, which is where we derive the English words magi or magic.
Yes, but they weren't performing parlor tricks.
So who are these men in the actual context of the ancient Near East?
The magoi were highly elite, priestly professionals. They were the supreme scholars, astronomers, and political advisors of the Eastern Empire.
Like Persia and Babylon.
Specifically tracing back to the regions of Persia and Babylon. In the ancient Parthian and Persian empires, the Magi were quite literally kingmakers.
Kingmakers, yes.
No monarch could successfully ascend to the throne in those empires without the explicit approval, the religious sanction, and often the physical crowning performed by the Magi.
Wow.
They held an immense amount of political and religious power.
That completely shatters the quaint nativity image. I mean, if these are powerful, wealthy kingmakers from a rival Eastern empire, they are not traveling alone.
Not at all.
They are not quietly slipping into the back door of Jerusalem unnoticed.
No, an international diplomatic mission of this magnitude, undertaken by men of such high status, would require a massive logistical operation.
Right.
They would have traveled with a substantial military cavalry escort just to protect them from bandits across the trade routes.
That makes sense.
They would have had servants, cooks, extensive baggage trains. When this entourage approached the gates of Jerusalem, it would have looked like a small army cresting the horizon.
And naturally, given their mission, they assumed the capital city would already be in a state of chaotic joy.
They fully expected that.
They figured that if the king of the Jews had been born, the entire nation would be throwing a massive festival.
Obviously.
So they ride into Jerusalem expecting to find the royal palace illuminated with celebration, but instead they find a city that has absolutely no idea what they're talking about.
Complete ignorance.
The streets are quiet, the religious leaders are utterly ignorant, and so the Magi drop an absolute theological hand grenade right in the middle of Herod's court.
A massive hand grenade. Look at verse 2.
They ask a question that must have made the air in the room run cold. They say, "Where is he that is born king of the Jews?"
The emphasis there must be placed heavily on the word born.
Born king.
Yes. In the political context of Herod's court, those 2 words are basically an act of verbal treason.
Because Herod wasn't born a king.
As we just established, Herod was an appointed king. He acquired his title through political bribery, manipulation, and the edge of a Roman sword. He possessed kingship purely by artificial decree.
But Jesus possesses kingship by nature.
By intrinsic divine birthright.
Exactly.
When the Magi ask this question, they are essentially looking at Herod's entire administrative apparatus and saying, "We have no interest in the man Rome propped up on this throne. We are looking for the sovereign who arrived in this world with his royal title already intimately woven into his DNA."
It is a complete, undeniable delegitimization of Herod's entire existence.
It completely exposes him as a fraud in his own palace.
But, it begs a massive question. How do pagan astronomers from Babylon know that a Jewish king has been born?
That's a great question.
They explain their source in the second half of verse 2. They say, "For we have seen his star in the east and are come to worship him."
Which is just a remarkable demonstration of God's sovereign communication.
Right. He speaks their language.
Exactly. He condescends to speak to these seekers using a vocabulary they are already intensely studying the heavens.
But we should be careful here, right?
Yes, we must be very careful not to reduce this to mere pagan astrology.
Because these men were from the east.
The very region where the Jewish people had been exiled centuries prior.
Right, the Babylonian captivity.
Exactly. When the Jews were taken to Babylon, they didn't just bring their people, they brought their sacred texts.
They brought the Torah, the prophets.
Brought everything. And if we study the book of Daniel, we see something highly relevant here.
Oh, this is fascinating.
Daniel, a devoted Hebrew prophet, was actually elevated by King Nebuchadnezzar to be the master of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers.
Wait, really?
Yes. Daniel was placed in charge of the ancient order of the Magi.
That is a staggering historical connection. So these first-century Magi weren't just staring at the sky making random astrological guesses.
Not at all.
They had access to Daniel's writings.
They possessed the rich prophetic archives of the Hebrews. They had the chronological timeline of Daniel's 70 weeks prophecy.
Right.
They undoubtedly had access to prophecies like Numbers chapter 24, verse 17, which explicitly declares, I shall see him, but not now. I shall behold him, but not nigh. There shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel.
A star out of Jacob. Wow.
They studied the celestial phenomenon, they cross-referenced it with the ancient Hebrew prophecies preserved in their libraries, and they deduced that the divine timetable had reached its fulfillment.
And their reaction to this realization is what makes them the genuine heroes of this narrative.
It really does.
They didn't undertake this incredibly arduous, dangerous, multi-month journey across the desert just to observe a political anomaly.
No.
They didn't come to establish trade routes or negotiate a treaty with a new regime. They state their purpose plainly. We are come to worship him.
The Greek verb employed there is proskine.
Proskine.
Yes, and this is not a casual nod of respect. It implies falling to one's knees, prostrating oneself, literally kissing the ground or the hem of a garment.
Total submission.
It is an act of total submission reserved for recognizing absolute divine majesty.
These powerful, wealthy, intellectual elites of the Eastern world have traveled hundreds of miles for one singular purpose, to bow down in the dirt before a Jewish child.
They recognize the infinite worth of the king.
While the theological scholars standing in the very shadow of the temple completely missed him.
It's tragic.
Which catapults us into the psychological crisis of the narrative. We transition abruptly from the joyful, determined quest of these Gentile outsiders to the sheer, unfiltered panic it induces in the capital.
The contrast is jarring.
Verse 3 sets the scene. When Herod the king had heard these things, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him.
The English word troubled is honestly somewhat sanitized.
Yeah, it sounds like he was just annoyed.
Right. But the original Greek word is idarak. It does not mean he was mildly inconvenienced.
What does it mean?
It means he was deeply shaken, convulsing with fear, agitated to the very core of his being.
Wow.
The arrival of the Magi is a seismic event that cracks the fragile foundation of his illegitimate kingdom. Herod realizes instantly that if a true born heir of David has arrived, his dynasty is entirely finished.
But I want to push back on a phrase in that verse because it has always bothered me.
Okay, which phrase?
I completely understand why Herod is terrified. He's a tyrant about to lose his job. But the text says all Jerusalem was troubled with him.
Ah, yes.
Why is the city panicking? Shouldn't the Jewish people living in Jerusalem be throwing open their windows and cheering, the Magi just announced that the long-awaited Messiah is finally here?
You would think so.
Right. Why does the arrival of hope cause widespread terror?
Well, if we understand the brutal psychology of living under a dictator, it makes perfect chilling sense.
Okay.
The citizens of Jerusalem were intimately familiar with Herod's playbook. They had lived through his paranoid purges.
He knew what he was capable of.
Exactly. They knew that whenever Herod felt his grip on power slipping, whenever he felt threatened by a rival, rivers of blood flowed through the streets of Jerusalem.
Oh, man.
The people are not necessarily terrified of the Messiah. They are paralyzed by the anticipated political fallout. They know that a terrified Herod is a lethal Herod.
If the king is esoteric, the people know a massacre is imminent.
Precisely. Tragically, they have become so accustomed to the darkness, so desperate to maintain their uneasy, compromised peace with Rome, that they view the arrival of their true king merely as a dangerous political disruption.
They actually prefer the predictability of their bondage over the chaos of their liberation.
It's a sad reality of human nature.
So Herod, operating in a state of absolute panic, immediately convenes a crisis meeting. Verse 4. And when he had gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, he demanded of them where Christ should be born.
Notice the dark irony embedded in this moment.
What do you mean?
Herod, an apostate, murderous king who possesses absolutely no genuine reverence for the God of Israel, suddenly becomes intensely interested in biblical exegesis.
That's so true.
He summons the theological heavyweights. He brings in the chief priests, who represent the wealthy, powerful political Saducean aristocracy that controlled the temple complex.
Right.
And he brings in the scribes, the professional legal scholars of the day.
These are men who have literally dedicated their entire existence to meticulously copying, studying, and debating the nuances of the Old Testament text.
Exactly. And Herod is not asking them for spiritual guidance.
No, at all.
He is weaponizing their theological knowledge. He is demanding the exact geographical coordinates of his target.
And what's staggering to me is that the religious elite don't even have to look it up.
They know it instantly.
They don't need to consult a library. They have the answer hardwired into their memory. Look at verses 5 and 6. They say, "In Bethlehem of Judaea, for thus it is written by the prophet, and thou, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, art not the least among the princes of Judah. For out of thee shall come a governor that shall rule my people Israel."
The religious leaders instantly quote Micah chapter 5, verse 2, and it is a magnificent prophecy.
It is.
It takes Bethlehem, a tiny, seemingly insignificant shepherd village, and elevates it to cosmic importance. It is by no means least because it is the designated birthplace of the ultimate governor.
And the word translated as rule there is really interesting, right?
Yes, in the original language, it literally means to shepherd.
To shepherd my people Israel.
This is a direct, deliberate callback to 2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 2, where God explicitly tells David that he will shepherd the people of Israel.
The scribes are confirming that the Messiah will be the ultimate shepherd king.
They are. But the tragedy of this moment is multi-layered, and it gets darker the closer you look at it.
Yeah, let's really analyze how the scribes quote Micah here, because if you lay their quotation in Matthew next to the original Hebrew text of Micah chapter 5, verse 2, you notice they omitted a massive critical clause.
It is.
Micah originally prophesied that this coming ruler's goings forth have been from of old, from everlasting.
That is a profound observation. The scribes selectively edited the prophecy when speaking to Herod.
They left out the most important part.
They gave the paranoid king the geographical location Bethlehem, but they deliberately omitted the theological reality of the Messiah's pre-existence and absolute deity,
They just presented the prophecy of a purely political governor.
conveniently leaving out the terrifying truth that this king is the eternal creator God stepping into human time.
Which makes their apathy even more dangerous than Herod's rage. They are actively suppressing the truth of who this king actually is.
Yes, they are.
And that leads to the second, truly heartbreaking tragedy of this scene, their physical and spiritual paralysis.
The paralysis is just astounding.
Think about the sheer absurdity of this situation for a second. These men are the professional guardians of the messianic hope.
That's their whole job.
Right. And the Magi, these wealthy foreign dignitaries, have just traveled across hostile deserts for months because they saw a sign in the heavens. They arrive at the palace and announce, "The king is here."
Right.
And the scribes pull out the scroll, point to the text, and say, yes, according to the prophet Micah, he will be born in Bethlehem.
And Bethlehem is exactly 5 miles south of where they are having this conversation.
5 miles.
It is an easy afternoon walk.
It is literally a 2-hour stroll. And yet, there is no record of a single priest, not a single scribe, closing their books, packing a bag, and walking those 5 miles to see if the culmination of all human history is lying in a house down the road.
It is the most chilling portrait of dead religion in the entire biblical narrative.
Dead religion, that's exactly what it is.
They possess the flawless intellectual knowledge of exactly where the king is located, but they possess absolutely zero heart for him.
Yeah.
They are entirely content to remain within their comfortable religious systems, their lucrative temple rituals, and their elevated social status in Jerusalem.
They just didn't care enough to move.
They represent a theological system with immense, precise academic knowledge, but possessing zero spiritual illumination or movement. They knew the unvarnished truth, but the truth did not move their feet 1 single inch.
That reality should absolutely terrify anyone who studies theology.
It terrifies me.
It is entirely possible for you to have perfect doctrinal precision, to know the original languages, to be able to quote the prophets from memory, and yet have a heart that is completely cold to the living Christ.
If we don't have the desire to actually draw near and worship, we are doing nothing more than playing the role of the scribes in Herod's court.
We are librarians of a revolution we refuse to join.
That's well said. Knowledge divorced from worship is nothing more than sophisticated pride. The scribes had the map, but the Magi took the journey.
So we leave the public apathy of the scribes and we move into the private, calculated wickedness of Herod. The plot thickens. After extracting the geographic coordinates from the religious elite, Herod pivots his strategy. He realizes he can't trust the Jewish leaders with his true intentions, so he goes underground.
Yes, he does.
Verses 7 and 8. Then Herod, when he had privily called the wise men, inquired of them diligently what time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, and said, Go and search diligently for the young child, and when ye have found him, bring me word again, that I may come and worship him also.
Every word in that directive drips with malice.
It really does.
The text notes that Herod called them privily, He operates in the shadows. He dismisses the scribes and holds a secret closed-door meeting with the Magi.
And notice carefully what he asks them. He does not inquire about the theological nature of the star.
No,
He doesn't ask about the glory of the child or the meaning of the ancient prophecies.
he inquires diligently about the exact time the star first appeared.
He wants a timestamp.
This is not the curiosity of an amateur astronomer. He is gathering military intelligence.
Yeah, he's building a target profile.
He is using the celestial phenomenon as a strict chronological marker to calculate the precise age of the child. This is the cold, calculated premeditation that will shortly culminate in the horrific slaughter of the innocents in Bethlehem.
He is establishing the parameters for a genocide.
Exactly.
And to cover his tracks, he tells the most diabolical, sickening lie in the entire narrative. He says, "Bring me word again that I may come and worship him also."
Hypocrisy at its finest.
He adopts the exact same religious vocabulary the Magi just used worship. It is the ultimate mask.
Herod is a masterclass in deception. He utilizes the vocabulary of faith, the language of reverence, to conceal a heart entirely consumed by murder.
It's a sobering, eternal reminder for us.
It is, simply because someone uses the right religious buzzwords. Just because they publicly state they want to worship, it by no means guarantees their heart is actually bowed before God.
He was attempting to manipulate the sincere devotion of the seekers, turning them into unwitting informants for an assassination plot.
But God will not allow his king to be outmaneuvered by a corrupt politician playing games in the dark.
Amen to that. The Magi leave the toxic atmosphere of Herod's palace, and then we read verse 9. When they had heard the king, they departed. And lo, the star which they saw in the east went before them till it came and stood over where the young child was.
And this is a verse we really need to lean into.
We do, because the nature of this star is one of the most fiercely debated topics among biblical scholars and skeptics alike.
Oh, heavily debated.
You have critical scholars like Bart Ehrman who look at this verse and say, come on, a star traveling low in the sky and stopping over a specific house, that defies all laws of astrophysics.
Right, they scoff at it.
They argue that this entire narrative is non-historical. They classify it as Jewish midrash, essentially arguing that Matthew is just writing religious fiction, ripping off the story of Moses and the Exodus pillar of fire, and pasting it onto Jesus to manufacture legitimacy.
That's a very common critical view.
So how do we respond to that exegetically without just dismissing their skepticism out of hand?
It is a vital question. The critical scholars assume that Matthew is engaging in creative theological fabrication because they pre-commit to a worldview where the supernatural is impossible.
They rule it out before they even read the text.
Exactly. But if we evaluate the text on its own merits, Matthew is writing historical narrative, not allegorical midrash.
Midrash wasn't used like that anyway, right?
No, midrash in the ancient Jewish tradition was a method of commenting on existing scripture. It was not inventing new historical events out of whole cloth and presenting them as facts to a first-century audience that could still cross-examine the claims.
Matthew expects his readers to believe this actually occurred in space and time.
He absolutely does.
But then, on the flip side of the debate, you have well-meaning historians and Christian apologists who desperately try to find a naturalistic explanation to make the text sound more scientifically palatable.
They want to prove it with astronomy.
Right. They point to Johannes Kepler's famous discovery of a rare planetary conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in the constellation of Pisces around 7 BC.
Yes. Or they try to argue it was Halley's Comet passing through in 12 BC.
Or perhaps a Chinese recorded supernova in 5 BC. They try to bend astronomy to fit the narrative.
And while the desire to align the biblical text with astronomical history is understandable, we must evaluate those theories strictly against the language of verse 9.
Let's look at the physics described in the Greek.
The text explicitly states that the star went before them, and then it stood over where the young child was.
Right.
Natural celestial bodies, planetary conjunctions, and comets simply do not behave like that. A conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn is a massive, distant visual phenomenon in the night sky.
It's light years away.
It moves steadily from east to west due to the Earth's rotation. It cannot dynamically change direction, travel low in the Earth's atmosphere, act as a localized guide down the road from Jerusalem to Bethlehem, and then put a laser pointer focus over one specific roof in a tiny village.
A natural star would indicate an entire hemisphere, not a single house. I mean, if you've ever tried to follow the moon while driving in a car, it always stays ahead of you. It doesn't suddenly take a right turn and hover over a specific address.
That's a perfect way to picture it. It defies natural explanation.
So if we reject the religious fiction theory And the text itself defies the natural planetary conjunction theory. What is the exegetically sound conclusion here?
The only interpretation that remains faithful to the text is that this was a miraculous, localized, supernatural phenomenon.
God did a miracle.
Yes. And in our lifelong study of the Old Testament, this is actually a deeply familiar concept. We see God utilizing localized, brilliant manifestations of light to guide and protect his people continually.
Think of the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire that literally led the Israelites through the wilderness in the book of Exodus.
Exactly. Or think of the Shekinah glory of God that settled upon the tabernacle or filled Solomon's temple.
Ah, so this star could have been the Shekinah glory.
This star was most likely a localized manifestation of that same Shekinah glory. Alternatively, it could have been an angelic guide, since angels are frequently referred to metaphorically as stars in biblical poetry, such as in Job or Revelation.
Okay, that makes perfect sense biblically.
Either way, it was a tailored, divine, supernatural beacon specifically dispatched to lead these seeking Gentiles directly to the feet of the Word made flesh.
I just love the profound consistency of that. The God who guided Moses through the desert is the exact same God guiding the Magi to the Messiah.
He's consistent.
And look at the visceral reaction of the Magi when this supernatural guide reappears in verse 10. When they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceeding great joy.
The language there is so intense.
It really is. If you look at the Greek construction here, Matthew is basically tripping over his own vocabulary trying to describe the magnitude of their emotion. It's not just they were happy.
It is a beautifully redundant, overflowing expression of pure ecstasy. The Greek text literally reads that they rejoiced with a joy, a megajoy, exceedingly. Yeah. It is joy, layered upon joy, breaking the boundaries of standard vocabulary. And this is the undeniable hallmark of the kingdom of God.
Contrast their exceeding great joy with the paranoid, suffocating trouble of Herod and the citizens of Jerusalem.
It's night and day. When you finally step out of the corrupt, fear-based systems of the world, when you ignore the apathy of the religious elite and you find the true, living light, the result is profound, unshakable mega joy.
Which brings us to the ultimate destination of their journey. We finally arrive at the climax of the visit, but as we read verse 11, we have to do some more dismantling of our traditional assumptions.
Bring it on.
The scene we are about to observe looks vastly different than the peaceful manger scene we are so accustomed to. Verse 11 says, "And when they were come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented unto him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh."
There are so many specific, precise details here that completely shatter our cultural traditions.
Let's break them down.
First, observe the location. They enter a house. The Greek word is oikion.
Oikion?
Yes. They are not standing in a cave or a stable. Mm-hmm. They are not crowded around a wood manger with the shepherds and the livestock.
So the nativity scenes have merged two different events.
They absolutely have.
Yeah.
Second, observe the description of Jesus. They see a young child. The Greek word utilized here is paidion.
Paidion.
Which specifically refers to a toddler or a young boy. It does not refer to a newborn nursing infant, which would typically be described by the word brephos.
Okay, so if they are in a house and Jesus is a walking, talking toddler, what does that mean for the chronological timeline of these events?
If we responsibly harmonize Matthew's account with a historical record in the Gospel of Luke, a very clear timeline emerges. This visit from the Magi did not occur on the night of the birth.
Not the same night.
It likely occurred months, perhaps even up to 2 full years after the events described in Luke chapter 2.
Up to 2 years later.
Yes. Luke tells us about the night of the birth, the lack of room in the inn, the manger, and the immediate visit of the local shepherds. After those initial chaotic days, Joseph and Mary did not immediately return to Nazareth.
They stayed in Bethlehem.
They clearly found a permanent dwelling, a house in Bethlehem, and settled there for a time.
And Herod's timeline confirms this, doesn't it?
It does. Herod's subsequent horrific decree to slaughter all the male children in Bethlehem from 2 years old and under was not a random age selection.
Right, he wasn't just guessing.
The text tells us Herod based that age parameter specifically on the timeline he had diligently extracted from the Magi during their secret meeting.
Oh, wow.
This confirms that Jesus was likely approaching 2 years of age when these Eastern dignitaries finally arrived at the house.
It is so crucial for you listening to read the text for what it actually says rather than what a greeting card or Renaissance painting tells us.
We have to let the word dictate the narrative.
And while we are looking closely at verse 11, there is another fascinating, highly intentional omission here. The text says, "They saw the young child with Mary his mother." Joseph is nowhere to be found in this specific sentence.
That is a masterstroke of divine inspiration.
Where is he?
Well, Joseph was certainly the legal, earthly, protective father, and we see his absolutely vital, obedient role elsewhere in the narrative.
Right, he leads them to Egypt later.
But in this specific sacred moment of divine adoration, the Holy Spirit inspired Matthew to push Joseph completely out of the frame.
Just erased from the scene entirely.
The focus narrows entirely to the child and the Virgin Mother. Why? To ruthlessly emphasize the divine, miraculous origin and the inherent royalty of Jesus.
He is the sole focus of the scene.
And notice the grammar of their worship. They fell down and worshipped him. Singular.
They did not worship Mary.
Emphatically, no.
Yeah.
They did not worship Mary. They did not offer worship to the Holy Family as a unit.
That's Jesus.
They'd recognize the incarnate God possessing the form of this toddler. And these massive, powerful, wealthy men who normally made kings bow to them, hit the dirt in total, singular submission to Jesus alone.
It gives me chills just trying to visualize the sheer humility of that moment.
It's breathtaking.
And then, while they are on the floor, they open their treasures. The Greek word is thesauros, which refers to treasure boxes or caskets.
Yes.
They don't just hand over a few coins. They present 3 highly specific, immensely valuable gifts.
Yeah.
Gold, frankincense, and myrrh.
The famous 3 gifts.
Now, these were not just expensive, practical presents to help a young family. These 3 elements are absolutely dripping with profound historical, theological, and prophetic symbolism.
They are preaching a sermon with their gifts.
Let's break them down meticulously for everyone. First, the gold.
Gold is the universal, timeless symbol of royalty, immense wealth, and sovereign kingship.
Fit for a king.
In the culture of the ancient Near East, it was strictly forbidden to approach a monarch without presenting a tribute of gold.
So they are honoring his royal bloodline.
By opening caskets of gold, these Gentile kingmakers are officially, practically acknowledging Jesus' royal Davidic blood. They are recognizing his inherent divine right to rule the nations. It is a profound acknowledgement of his sovereign kingship.
And then the frankincense. We don't really use frankincense much today, but in the first century, it was deeply significant.
Very significant. Frankincense was a highly fragrant, incredibly expensive resin, painstakingly extracted from specific trees in the region of Arabia.
But it had a very specific use, right?
Its primary essential use in the biblical context was strictly within the temple complex in Jerusalem. It was a required ingredient in the holy incense burned perpetually by the priests on the golden altar standing just before the veil of the Holy of Holies.
Wow, so it's tied directly to the priesthood.
The rising smoke of the incense represented the prayers of the people, intercession, and the enveloping divine presence. By presenting frankincense, the Magi are recognizing Jesus' deity.
They are pointing to his priesthood.
They are prophetically pointing to his future eternal role as the ultimate high priest, who will forever mediate the relationship between God and humanity.
And finally, we arrive at the third gift. And I have honestly always struggled with the myrrh.
It's a heavy one.
I understand the prophetic theology behind it, but just put yourself in that room for a second. You are visiting a young mother and her toddler, and you hand her a box of myrrh. Wouldn't that be incredibly jarring, perhaps even deeply offensive in that culture?
It is an incredibly sobering, almost crushing reality in the midst of this joyful scene.
Because what was myrrh used for?
Myrrh was a bitter spice, also derived from tree resin. While it did possess some minor medicinal and cosmetic uses, its primary, overwhelming association in the ancient Near East was with death.
Yeah.
It was the primary ingredient used for embalming the dead. It was a scent of the grave.
To bring burial spice embalming fluid essentially to a toddler is a startling, heavy, prophetic statement.
It signifies his absolute humanity and points directly, unavoidably, to the cross.
That this child was born to die.
It is an acknowledgement that this newly arrived king was born specifically to die. His ultimate victory, his crowning achievement, would not come through a military conquest, but through his sacrificial suffering, death, and burial.
Kingship, deity, and humanity. The sovereign, the priest, and the sacrifice.
It is the entire sweeping gospel narrative wrapped up and presented in 3 treasure boxes on a living room floor in Bethlehem.
That is just incredible. But Beyond the staggering prophetic theology of the gifts, there is a highly practical, immediate observation here that I absolutely love.
God's provision.
Yes, God is so incredibly practical in his sovereignty. Think about the economic status of this family. Joseph is a poor tradesman, a carpenter.
They're living a very meager existence.
In just a few verses, an angel is going to wake Joseph up in the middle of the night, warning him that Herod's death squads are currently marching toward Bethlehem and he needs to flee to Egypt immediately.
A sudden international relocation.
How does a poor carpenter fund a sudden, unexpected international relocation? How does he survive as a political refugee in a foreign country, feeding his family for months, perhaps years, while in hiding?
He funds the escape with the gold, the frankincense, and the myrrh.
Exactly. These incredibly expensive, easily transportable gifts were God's direct, divine provision.
God orchestrated a celestial event, moved the hearts of foreign dignitaries, and brought them across the known world at exactly the precise moment required to drop off the immense financial provision the Holy Family would need to survive the coming persecution.
Where God guides, he flawlessly provides.
It is a stunning, breathtaking display of his sovereign, meticulous care for his son.
It is just beautiful. And that brings us to the final movement of our study today. The climax of this majestic visit leads to a permanent, unalterable change in direction.
Yes, look at verse 12.
Verse 12. And being warned of God in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed into their own country another way.
God intervenes directly and decisively once again.
Just like he did with the star.
Just as he utilized a supernatural star to guide them safely to Jesus, he now uses a divine dream to guide them away from the danger of Herod.
And notice the response of the Magi. They possess the immediate obedience of true faith.
They don't try to negotiate.
They don't go back to Jerusalem to test the waters or play politics. They bypass the wicked king entirely and head back to the east, completely altering their travel plans and their trajectory.
There is such a beautiful, resonant spiritual metaphor embedded right there.
There really is. Once you have truly encountered the living word, once you have fallen down in the dirt and worshipped the king, you can never go back to the old way.
You can't unsee what you've seen.
You can never go back to Herod's corrupt, manipulative, death-dealing system. Your trajectory is permanently, eternally altered. You go back to your life, you go home, but you go home another way.
That is the defining reality of true conversion. You cannot come face to face with the incarnate Christ and remain on the same path you were traveling.
So true. Now, as we look at this entire narrative, I really want us to connect this to the grand, overarching architecture of the Bible.
The big picture.
Yes, because when a modern reader sees Gentile outsiders worshiping Jesus in chapter 2 of the New Testament, it is very easy to jump to a conclusion.
People do it all the time.
They might think, oh, here we go. Israel rejected him, so this is the immediate start of the Gentile church. This is the launch of the new Christian religion.
But if we are being careful, rigorous exegetes of the text, that interpretation is not actually accurate to what is happening here.
No, it is not. And this is exactly where we have to be incredibly disciplined students of the word.
We must read this passage strictly within its own context, which is the specific framework of the prophetic program of Israel.
Let's pause on that phrase for a second, the prophetic program.
Okay.
For a listener who might not be familiar with that specific theological architecture, how does that program function, and why is it so critical for understanding Matthew chapter 2?
Well, if you trace the narrative from Genesis 12 onward, throughout the entire Old Testament, God made very specific, physical, earthly, and unconditional promises to the nation of Israel.
He promised Abraham a land.
He promised David an eternal king and a literal earthly kingdom.
When Jesus arrives in the Gospel of Matthew, he is arriving specifically as the long-awaited fulfillment of those Jewish covenants.
Exactly. The Apostle Paul makes this remarkably clear later in Galatians chapter 4, verse 4.
What does Paul say there?
Paul writes that when the fullness of the time was come, God sent forth his Son, made of a woman, made under the law.
Made under the law.
Jesus was born strictly under the jurisdiction and the requirements of the Mosaic law. Furthermore, during his earthly ministry, Jesus himself explicitly stated that he was not sent to the world at large, but strictly to the lost sheep of the house of Israel.
So he is not arriving in Bethlehem to start a new, generic Gentile religion.
No, he is arriving to fulfill the unbreakable promises made to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and David.
But wait, if that's true, why are the Magi there?
That's the logical question. The Magi, despite being Gentiles, are not seeking the head of the body, the church. They explicitly ask for the King of the Jews.
So why are Gentiles present at all in Matthew chapter 2?
Because within that Old Testament prophetic program, there was always a designated subordinate role for the Gentile nations.
A prophetic role.
The ancient prophets declared that when Israel's king finally arrived, and when he established his glorious kingdom in Jerusalem, the Gentile nations would be drawn to that light.
Oh, I see.
The prophet Isaiah, in chapter 60, verse 3, captures this perfectly. And the Gentiles shall come to thy light, and kings to the brightness of thy rising.
The nations flowing into Jerusalem.
The prophets envisioned a scenario where the nations of the earth would flow into Jerusalem, bringing their wealth to honor Israel's king.
Oh, that is the key right there. So the Magi represent the Gentiles of prophecy.
They are the nations who come to God through the restored light of Israel, honoring her king and recognizing Israel's exalted status.
Precisely. This magnificent event in Bethlehem is the intended, beautiful transition from the age of prophetic promise to the age of glorious fulfillment.
The prophecy concerning the king and the kingdom had to be enacted, validated, and genuinely offered to the covenant nation first. Jesus had to be presented to Israel as their legitimate, prophesied Messiah.
But as we just saw with the absolute panic of Herod and the cold, dead apathy of the scribes, the leadership of Israel was entirely unprepared and unwilling to receive him.
And that is the pivotal, tragic tension of the entire gospel narrative.
It's heartbreaking.
The trouble in Jerusalem and the apathy of the religious elite in Matthew 2 perfectly foreshadows the eventual devastating national rejection of the king.
Israel, as a collective nation, will ultimately reject their Messiah.
That rejection culminates in the crucifixion, and it is finalized in the early chapters of Acts with the stoning of Stephen.
And here's where the theological mechanism is so important for you to grasp.
Because of that definitive national rejection, God does not force the kingdom upon them.
No. Instead, he temporarily suspends that prophetic kingdom program.
He places it on a divine pause.
And in its place, he reveals something entirely new, something completely unprophesied.
Something the Old Testament prophets were entirely blind to.
What Paul calls the mystery.
Yes, the mystery. The dispensation of grace. Let me explain how that functions.
Please do.
A dispensation is simply a divine administration, a specific way God manages his household and dispenses his grace during a particular era.
Okay.
When the prophetic program is suspended, God institutes a new administration. This dispensation of grace was later committed exclusively to the Apostle Paul by the ascended, glorified Christ.
So Paul gets this new revelation.
In this current, present administration, God is doing something secret, something novel. He is forming the body of Christ.
And in this body, the distinction between Jew and Gentile is entirely erased.
Both are saved entirely by grace, through faith in the finished work of the cross, completely apart from the covenants and the works of the Mosaic law.
But it is crucial to understand that in Matthew chapter 2, we are not there yet.
No, not at all. The cross hasn't happened. Paul hasn't been saved. The mystery remains entirely hidden in the mind of God.
In Matthew 2, we are still functioning firmly and exclusively within the bounds of the prophetic program.
That theological framework is absolutely brilliant because it provides the most coherent, naturally text-driven explanation of everything we've read today.
You don't have to force the text to say things it isn't saying.
It explains exactly why the king arrived under the jurisdiction of the law. It explains why he was immediately rejected by the religious insiders who loved their system more than their savior.
And it explains exactly why these specific Gentiles were present at his birth, bringing the precise tribute prophesied by Isaiah.
It honors the literal text without forcing it to be an allegory for the modern church.
It reveals a God of incredible order, flawless timing, and perfect integrity. He fulfills his promises exactly as he said he would.
And even when humanity rebels, his sovereign purposes are never thwarted.
As we bring this deep dive into land, let's synthesize exactly what we have discovered in these 12 verses.
Let's do it.
We have seen that Jesus Christ is the legitimate, prophesied, eternal Davidic king, and his global manifestation creates a decisive, unavoidable crisis of division.
You cannot encounter the reality of this king and remain in a state of neutrality. It is impossible.
You will eventually be forced into one of three camps. You either respond like the Magi outsider Gentiles who recognize their desperate need and seek him with a sincere heart of radical, sacrificial worship.
Or you respond like Herod, rebelling in fear, violently protecting your own little kingdom, your own autonomy at all costs.
Or, tragically, you respond like the scribes, paralyzed by a religious apathy, knowing the absolute truth of the text but refusing to let that truth move you an inch.
And this reality raises a deeply piercing, vital question for you, the listener.
It really does. As we study this text together, we have to look in the mirror.
Are you relying entirely on your own religious methods? Do you possess incredible intellectual knowledge of the Bible? You know the doctrines, you can explain the history, you know the original languages, but you have no actual movement in your heart toward the Savior.
Are you sitting comfortably 5 miles away in Bethlehem, armed with all the right answers, but refusing to make the walk to fall down in worship?
Or are you willing to be an opportunist for grace?
The Magi had incredibly limited light, just a star and some ancient scrolls, but they relentlessly followed the light they were given at massive personal and financial cost, simply for the privilege of falling down in the dirt before him.
We must ask ourselves if we possess that same desperation.
That is a piercing reflection. And I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your week. Think about the stark, undeniable contrast of this story one more time.
It's a powerful contrast.
The Magi had no law. They had no covenants, they had no temple, no priesthood, and no history of God's miraculous deliverance in their ancestry.
Yet they possessed vastly more heart for the true king than the high priest standing in the holy place in Jerusalem did.
What treasures of earth are you clinging to right now? What personal comfort, what political status, what dead religious routine is keeping you completely insulated and safe in your own little Jerusalem?
Are those things preventing you from opening your casket, from offering your absolute best to the king who has already fulfilled the word in your life?
400 years of deafening, terrifying silence was finally broken by the cry of a toddler in a small house in Bethlehem. The king has stepped onto the stage of human history. The only question left for you is, will you bring him your treasures, or will you stay comfortable in the dark?
Amen.
Keep seeking, keep studying the word, and we will see you next time.